It's a real pleasure to introduce the first guest of the Trust Builders, Bruce Temkin. My name is Chris Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Door Board, and I'm joined today by Alex Genov, who is the co-host, head of customer research at Zappos.
Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from this look into just the numbers and the stats to looking more at humans in general.
I'm glad you asked, and because humanity at scale is my new thing. In about 2017, I had an epiphany about what we did. I believe that if we can take some of those learnings about human beings, that we can spark a better level of humanity across everyone. I'm glad you asked, and because humanity at scale is my new thing, right? I'm committed to helping the world get better at what we do with each other. So it was when I was at Temkin Group, we were acquired in 2018, and about 2017, I had an epiphany about what we did, right? I thought we were a market research and advisory company that trained people, right? But then I started to look at where we had our passion and energy. And I started to reframe what I thought we were, which is we're an organization that understands people, right? Understands human beings, and then provides organizations with advice on how to achieve what they want, knowing how individuals, human beings, think, act, and act, right? Think, feel, and act. And so whether they're customers or employees. And so that's been shaping, if you look at the things that I speak about and I have passion about, they always fall into the realm of, okay, let's look at human beings first, and then let's wrap around them some environment, and let's understand how that environment will either get them to do something we want them to do, feel some way we want them to feel, or behave in some way we want them to behave, or not. And so when it comes to what I'm at now is, I believe, so that was working with like organizations in the context of experience management. I believe that if we can take some of those learnings about human beings and apply them to bigger settings, right, to how boards of directors and CEOs think about their organization, how human beings think about their relationships with their loved ones, how Republicans think about their relationship with Democrats, right? That we can spark a better level of humanity across everyone. So I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with it, but that was me. It was at some point in time, I realized that my passion was around understanding human beings in the context of the world in which they live.
That's beautiful, and this music to my ears, Bruce, because that's exactly has been my approach. And I'm being a classically trained social psychologist, right? That's how I've always approached this, and bringing in this perspective. But let me follow up on that and ask you. So. And I do have a point of view here, but I don't want to bias you. But what has been your success talking to executives and to business leaders about that versus the traditional approach of them looking at the spreadsheets and the numbers and making decisions and designing for families with 2.4 children and talking about 6.3 purchases, right? 6.3, and trying to increase the purchase by what is a 0.3 purchase, right? And but that's the mentality now. So what has been your experience talking to leaders about humans?
So one of the things that I always, in my work with, like, whether it's a board of directors or CEOs, right, or anyone, is, first of all, I don't assume that they care about the things that I care about. If I'm talking to an audience, I feel it's my obligation to talk about what they care about and put whatever I want to talk about in the context of the things that they care about, right? So if I'm going to talk to like a CEO, right? I'll look at what their latest annual report was, or the latest analyst statement, where they declare what they are trying to achieve. And I know that for me to gain relevance with my ideas, I need to start with that. What are they trying to achieve? And say, okay, you want to do that. Well, I'm going to talk about how you're dealing with your employees or your customers or society, and sort of try and conceptually build those two curves, those that I talked about, which is, all right, you want to be the most dominant retailer in terms of market share over the next year. Well, great, you want to do that. Let me show you two curves. You keep treating them like that, you start losing them. So for me, it's always been, first of all, that I try to put my ideas in the context of what other people want to achieve. And then the second thing is, I try to use very simple, basic language, right? Like, I think one of the things that's people generally talk about when they read the things that I publish, and when I talk, I try to leave people with simple ideas and simple things to do, because it's funny, I find that in order for me to understand things, I need to simplify them a lot. Right, it's sort of that's one of the jujitsu things. That could be a flaw of mine, right? I don't deal well in chaos, right? So I need to create structure and simplicity, right? And so that's been my mental model need, but it served me well in terms of my communication style.
And just to kind of tease that out, so how would you then, to build on Alex's point, you're convincing the self-interest, profit-oriented organization to move to humanity at scale? Is the simple ideas or the pathway to do that, Bruce? What would be a good way to kind of tease that out?
To me, it's so if I think about humanity at scale, when it comes to like a CEO, there are three levers to it, right? There's one, the society you live in. There's one, the employees that you're interacting with, and there's one that there's customers who you want to serve, right? And to me, it's we have to paint a picture of, if you don't improve humanity, because it turns out people are more motivated by loss than gain. And given that Daniel Kahneman passed away yesterday, it feels appropriate to bring in some behavioral economics. But one of the key motivators is not opportunity, but it's lost opportunity, right? So knowing that, and frame it as, okay, if you continue to do this with customers, treat them and have them feel this way about you, you will lose these things over time. You do it with employees, you'll lose, so part of it is framing the story around loss more than gains, because that's where people are motivated. But that's what I would do. I would show the profit and try and show the profit and loss of those things. And then secondarily, play to their egos, because one of the things that you have to recognize about leaders is they are not just rational beasts, right? They have egos. So understanding their egos. So I remember I was working with the CEO of a very large healthcare company, a health system, and one of the things that he had said early on, but we played out on, is he wanted to leave a legacy. And just about every senior executive wants to leave a legacy, right? So that's often a card you can play, which is you have all the stuff for the cognitive side of them, right? The rational side, but then you're like, all right, you're going to be here another 5 years, right? If you continue to go like that, here's what your impact on society is going to be. Is that the legacy you want to leave, right? But you can do all the things and succeed at what you want and build a legacy of positivity in the community. Like that's the way I would do it. Play both to their rational needs, but for leaders, obviously have some goals around how they want to be perceived in their legacy. So I'd play around with those as levers.
And just to build on that, and Alex, please come in as well. Have you then examples where that's played out, Bruce, to have a real impact, in terms of organizations that do that really, really well, as who followed that through and created impact as a result?
So, well, I've been talking a lot, so I'll let Alex share his thoughts because I don't want to squeeze out.
Sure.
I'm sure he's sitting there with a ton of things. So,
No, Bruce, you're our guest. This is about you and your thoughts.
Yeah. Because what I was kind of scratching at was your thought that humanity at scale is a movement, right? And I think what you've done is laid out a really practical way and a common kind of language for individuals and organizations to create persuasion around building trust and actually having a positive contribution to the broader world, right? And I think what I wanted to do is just pull the string a wee bit longer to say, is there some role models or examples that our listeners could look to say, yes, they have achieved the outcome that you've described?
So, I mean, I would say that when it comes to humanity at scale, let's put that aside as a movement. The types of things that I'm looking at there are examples like the work that Bono's doing, right? That type of movement, the work that Oprah has done, right? Those are movement oriented in terms of trying the ice bucket challenge.
Yes.
Right. In terms of raising awareness and having, so in terms of the movement, I know that I need to create some simplicity of ideas. And it looks like to me, the ideas have a lot to do with the communities we see ourselves belonging to and how that drives our self-identity. So that is a different angle than the work that I've done in the past around helping leaders think about, trust and think about humanity, right? So so I don't have examples of companies that have done humanity at scale because that wasn't the work. I was trying to get them to make discrete decisions around how they treated individual employees and customers and their overall communities. And lots of examples of that, right? There are, the healthcare company that I talked about ended up shifting their entire focus away from employers to ultimately to the consumers of their good, because those were the people who they were selling to and needed to better understand. I've worked with pharmaceutical companies. I worked with a pharmaceutical company that was introduced a drug that had a new delivery system. So if you think about, I won't mention the exact one, but there are some custom drugs that specialty pharma have to exist. These are drugs that are formulated for the particular patient, right? Standard drug, but it's formulated. So once you have a symptom, you have to notify them, they have to create it, it has to be refrigerated or whatever, and has to be, built on. And so with that, work with the pharmaceutical was helping them understand, and this has to do with trust, right? It has to having them understand what patients and what the pharmacies needed to understand about each other, right? To be able to have that process go flawless, because it was an amazing drug that was going to do amazing work for patients, but the path that a patient had to go through and that the pharmacy had to go through was convoluted, not understood. And that's because, and this is a common problem that I work around, which is they were optimizing for the wrong thing. They were optimizing for cutting price and cost out of the process instead of optimizing around repeatability and consistency. And so in that case, having them understand that repeatability and consistency was what was going to build trust and adoption, as opposed to getting perfection around some other measurements and metrics they were using. So lots of examples of that, but in terms of humanity at scale, I'm working on that now, and we'll figure out exactly what that looks like over the next couple months.
I love that. And Alex, I know you have examples off the tip of your tongue. Maybe you want to add to that.
I mean, one example is this hospitality industry, and I think it's a great example of delivering for that. Again, thinking of Danny Meyer and his set of restaurants. But I think what this brings to mind for me is this is unpacking the term at scale a little bit, because I absolutely love the idea of, okay, let's expand this idea, right? Expand the idea of humanity and humanizing. But what I also believe, and I want to get Bruce's thoughts on that as well, is that this is a leadership mindset that I think works also against it, because at scale is what every company wants to do. Can we scale it, right? And when you bring in the idea of customer sentiment, which is how customers are feeling, right away, a leader would say, can we do this at scale? The first few seconds, like milliseconds, they say no. And speaking of, Bruce Kahneman's thinking fast and thinking slow, they're like, can we do that at scale? Can I figure out how people feel at scale? No, I can't. Forget it, right? Can we measure price changes at scale? Sure, right away. Let's focus there. So, Bruce, what's your...
Yeah.
Because many of the great ideas that have panned out initially did not feel scalable, right? But
Yep.
only leaders that were visionary enough to ignore that urge then apply them and won. So what are your thoughts around that?
Great question. So when for me, when I talk about scale, I know that I am going to have to do two things. One is introduce a conceptual framework that is incredibly easy to understand and self-motivating, meaning once you see it and read it, you understand it and you can see yourself in it. And the second of all I'm gonna have to do is create some draw to that conceptual model, right? And to give you a sense of like what it might look like in work that I've done, which is we were working with one of the world's largest tech companies. This was before I was with Qualtrics, right? We, think about, one of the 3 largest tech companies on earth. And we were doing work with them on understanding personas and experience design, right? Just wanting, and my client at this organization came to me and said, Bruce, this is great. We're learning a ton here, but we have clients around the world in hundreds of countries with lots of different sectors. How do we take that notion of personas and scale it, right? So when I think about scale, like in that one, I thought, okay, how do we get it's sort of the 80-20 rule. Like, how do we get the power of personas in a way that this organization could scale? So we came up with a simple format, which is we said, all right, there are 2 dimensions that are consistently important across your regions for your customers. So let's create a 2x2, right, for each one of them, high and low, which gives you a 4 quadrants, right? And so let's globally use those 4 quadrants as the core personas that every country builds around, right? They won't speak to 100% of the customers in any region, in any country, but in every region, in every country, they talk to a majority of the customers. And therefore, those 4 personas that are consistently used around the world will not only help introduce the notion of personas and get them going, but it'll also create a global dialogue around these consistent sets where not only it's not an attempt to push everyone to be consistent, but we have a consistent language, say, okay, those in our country, those personas represent 60% of our customers. Okay, so 60%, you have a view that you can talk about. In another country, it might be 70, another country might be 25. But we now have the power of this consistent persona model across everywhere else, right? And you can, and for each one of those quadrants in every country, they could determine what the attributes and what the behaviors were for their customers in those personas. So to me, driving something at scale requires simplicity, ease of access, something that's powerful and useful, and then some triggers to get people to try it and internalize it. So I'll come full circle. It could be, and I'm not committing to this, but one of the ways to think about like at scale for humanity is maybe it comes down to that we've gotten to a world where there's so much thrown at us, right? Social media, information, right? And a lot of our institutions are not as strong as they used to be. So human beings are much more reactive. And I would say that's the case, right? Like all you have to do is look at TikTok. What do you watch? So what's happened is human beings have become a lot less purposeful in the decisions that they make, how we spend our time, what information, right? So maybe humanity at scale, and I'm not committing to this, but I'm giving you a sense that maybe it is about getting people to think about intentions and reflections. That could be the simplicity of the model, intentions of reflection. How do I get everyone across the world to think more about what it is that they want to achieve and reflecting on how they're spending their time to achieve it, right? It could be that humanity at scale is simply getting more and more people thinking about intentions and reflections to be more purposeful in how they spend their time and how they deal with other people that could drive the movement I'm looking for. So that's, to me, what I have to scale. I have to have simple ways in which people can change the way they think, believe, and act.
That's perfect, Bruce. And I think, I completely agree with you. And I definitely see your point. And my point is that a lot of things, almost everything is scalable. It's just that in this case, you work with a client that was open-minded enough to let you present your point, because in many cases you will have decision makers. So they go, do I invest in Bruce's thing, right? No, I don't think it's scalable. No, move on to the next thing, right? Because they don't see it. But in this case, of course, you can scale a lot of things, and that's bringing in, of course, AI now, which is I really loved your model, which was basically distinguishing the what from the how, and this is what I learned when I was at Intuit, right? Our CEO at the time was coming from GE. He was very disciplined in terms of how you think about things, and if you are clear on the what, then you can apply many hows, right? And that's, to me, is the big danger nowadays of this discussion with obsession with AI, is that everybody's rushing to the how, and and you can scale humanity using AI, but you have to start with exactly what you're saying. What am I trying to do? And then how am I going to do it? It can be pen and paper, and it can be AI.
Yeah, I think it, and by the way, one of my early training, I was with GE, so that was a big influence on who I am and what I do now. But you're right. I think AI is a tool, right? We gotta remember that it's a tool, right? Like, so it's not the answer, it's a tool, right? If someone gave you a hammer, it doesn't mean that, okay, now it's clear that you need to build a house. You have to decide what's the house you want to build. What are the designs you want to have around the house, then bring the hammer to it to get the output that you want. As with all new tools, right, people view them as these sexy new things and just throw them out everywhere and use them in every place. And what we know what's going to happen. We've seen it before. There's going to be a lot of wasteful projects, right? There's going to be a lot. I guarantee you that in 2 years, there's going to be sunsetting of so many AI projects that it's going to make your mind dizzy. But having said that, AI is going to change the world because the few that actually continue are ones that people were thoughtful about and clear about what they were doing and figured out how to make them scale. But that's the way it works with more new tools. There's more misuse with new tools than there are scalable good uses.
Right. And to me, that's precisely because you don't think of the what, and bring in Dave's comment from about why. And I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek has this the golden circle model, which is you ultimately have to start with why you're doing something, and then talk about what you're doing, right? And then lastly, how you're doing it, right? It's basically because how you do things will change, and what you do also to some extent will change, but that's taking the discussion to really next level.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Simon. Simon does great work, and I agree his work on why is cool. Another example of that was Colin Powell, the general, the U.S. general, and one of the things he talked about was, if you are trying to get a battalion to take over, a spot, and you want to get them going, you have to be really clear about why they're doing it, right? And then you have to leave, as a leader, you have to leave the how ultimately to the people in the field, right? If you stop prescribing too much of the how from above, then they don't have the freedom or the ability to respond to the changes that you'll never see from the headquarters, right? And another example of that I love to think about, it goes down to like even the personas and experience design, right? That the experience that individuals face are almost always more complicated than what we can conceptualize from a headquarters, right? And it reminds me of an IDEO project years and years and years ago where IDEO was brought in to redesign hospitals, right? They wanted to leave patients with a better experience. And so one of the projects that they recommended that the hospital said, what are you talking about? Was to paint the ceilings a cheerier color. And they said, well, we brought you in to make the experience. Who gives a crap about the color of the ceiling? And then they took the hospital executives and they lied them down on a gurney, right? And they said, that is what your patients see 90% of the time that they are in your hospitals.
Exactly. That's a great example. That's what we're talking about when we talk about experience. This is what we're talking about, right? It's not, now we talk about experience, like let's design experiences and then use it completely meaninglessly. We've overused it to the point that it's empty, but this is what it means. Like lay down, look up, how do you feel? That's the experience.
Yeah.
Could I maybe just kind of bring it back to the summary, which was we started the conversation, painting the picture of, why now and why trust is implicitly important. We then boiled it down to a definition, which Bruce, I think, very kindly shared. And we're going to make sure that every one of the listeners today gets the copy of that. We then looked at some of the practicalities in terms of bringing it into the organization. And I think, Bruce, you provided really practical steps of moving from risk to the language of change and persuasion, and how do you actually build through that. We did then look at how do we think about this at a broader level. And what I would love to do is just to get your concluding thoughts, having gone down the conversation that we've just had, and thinking about some of the practicalities of how do we start to think about putting this into practice, the idea of building trust and thinking about the intention of our actions in an organization. Is there any summary points or final reflections as we conclude the conversation for our listeners to kind of say what they could practically implement in the next week, in the next month, in the next year as they go about their work?
So I'll give you a closing thought, which is that I think that trust is an incredibly valuable asset that organizations don't yet recognize the value of, or value enough of it, right? And that if you think about the people you interact with, think about how many times you're asking them to put their faith in you delivering something to them, right? And if you thought about that and then thought about what am I doing to earn the trust of the people who I need to trust me? If you just ask that question, what am I doing to earn their trust? I think that's a great start, right? Because I believe in simple starts, but trust is an incredibly valuable asset.
Alex, is there any additional points you want to build on before we wrap up the session?
Oh no, this is beautifully put, Bruce, and I don't want to this. I'll let you give the last word, but thank you so much. Very insightful and a great kind of a journey you've embarked on.
You're a complete legend. Thank you so much.